The morning the church bells rang for his wedding, Corwin Adeyemi was scrubbing motor oil from his fingernails in a mechanic's shed, unaware that by sundown he would be a married man to a woman who could not open her eyes to see him. Corwin was 26 years old, the last of 3 sons in a family that had buried more dreams than it had ever fulfilled. His father drove a rusted delivery van until his knees gave out, and his mother sold roasted corn by the roadside to keep the lights on. Corwin himself worked as an apprentice mechanic in Lagos, sleeping most nights on a mattress on the floor of a one-room apartment he shared with 2 cousins.
He had never owned a suit.
He had never eaten in a restaurant with a tablecloth, and he certainly never imagined that his name would one day be spoken in the same breath as the Okonkwo family, whose empire of hotels and shipping lines stretched across 3 countries. But desperation makes strange bargains, and grief makes even stranger ones. It began 3 weeks earlier, when Corwin's mother collapsed from a stroke that the family could not afford to treat. The hospital bill climbed past anything Corwin could imagine earning in a decade. He had gone from office to office begging for loans, offering his labor for years in advance, until a stranger in a gray suit found him outside the hospital gate and made him an offer that sounded like a nightmare dressed as a miracle. The Okonkwo family needed a husband for their only daughter, Vivian, who had been lying in a coma for 8 months after a car accident that had killed her fiancé and left her family desperate to fulfill a clause in her late grandfather's will. The clause stated that Vivian must be married before her 28th birthday or lose control of the family empire to a distant cousin already circling like a vulture. They did not need love. They did not need a real husband. They needed a signature, a stranger willing to marry a woman in a hospital bed, and in exchange, they would pay for Corwin's mother's surgery and clear his family's debts entirely. Corwin said yes before he even finished hearing the terms, because a dying mother does not leave room for pride. The wedding took place in a private hospital chapel under the pale gold light of a Lagos morning, sunlight pouring through tall windows onto a room filled with lawyers. Instead of guests, Vivian Okonkwo lay in a wheelchair, dressed in white by nurses who treated her like a porcelain doll, her chest rising and falling with the quiet rhythm of machines. Corwin stood beside her in a borrowed suit, his hands trembling not from cold but from the surreal weight of promising forever to a woman who did not know his name, could not hear his voice, and might never wake up at all. When the priest asked if he would take her as his wife, Corwin looked at her still face, at the faint scar along her hairline, and something in his chest tightened that had nothing to do with the money. He said yes anyway, but for reasons even he could not yet explain. If this story about Corwin and Vivian is already moving something in your heart, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories, because the most beautiful part of this journey is still ahead. The days that followed were unlike anything Corwin had known. He moved into the Okonkwo estate, a mansion with marble floors that echoed his footsteps like judgment, and staff who watched him with suspicion, sharpened by loyalty to a family they believed he was exploiting. Vivian's older brother, Reginald, made no secret of his contempt, calling Corwin a leech in front of the household staff and warning him that the moment the will's conditions were satisfied, he would be shown the door with nothing but the clothes on his back. Corwin bore the insults in silence, because he had promised himself he would not let pride cost his mother her life, and because deep down he had already begun visiting Vivian's room every single morning before the sun had fully risen. He did not know why he did it at first. He would sit beside her hospital bed set up in a private wing of the estate, and he would talk to her the way he used to talk to his mother when she was too tired to answer, filling the silence so the room would not feel so much like a tomb. He told her about the smell of engine grease and fried plantain, about his brothers who teased him mercilessly, about the ocean he had seen only twice in his life. He read to her from old newspapers because he had nothing else to offer. And slowly, without meaning to, he began to feel less like a stranger paid to occupy a room and more like a man keeping vigil over someone he was starting to care for. The nurses noticed it first. The way Vivian's fingers occasionally twitched when Corwin spoke, the way her heart rate steadied during his visits in a manner the machines had never recorded before. The head physician, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Alaba, began documenting these changes with cautious hope. Though she warned the family not to expect miracles, Reginald dismissed it as coincidence, certain that Corwin was somehow manipulating the medical staff for sympathy, and he redoubled his efforts to have the marriage annulled before the will's requirements could be permanently secured. He hired investigators to dig into Corwin's past, hoping to find some scandal, some proof of greed, but found only a poor young man who sent every allowance he received straight to his mother's hospital and kept nothing for himself. 3 months into the marriage, on a bright afternoon when sunlight spilled gold across the hospital room floor, Corwin was reading aloud from a worn paperback novel when he felt her fingers curl weakly around his. He froze, certain he had imagined it, until her fingers tightened again, and this time her eyelids fluttered. Struggling against months of stillness, he called for the nurses in a voice that cracked with disbelief, and within minutes the room filled with doctors, with Vivian's mother sobbing against the doorway, with a chaos of hope that Corwin stood in the middle of, still holding her hand as though letting go might undo the miracle. Vivian's recovery was slow and painful, marked by confusion and physical therapy and the disorienting realization that 8 months of her life had vanished. Along with the fiancé she had once loved, she had to be told gently that she was married now, to a stranger who had signed papers beside her hospital bed. She looked at Corwin with wary, searching eyes, unable to reconcile the kind stories the nurses told her about his daily visits with the fact that he was, by every legal definition, a man who had married her for money. But stories have a way of revealing themselves in time. Vivian began asking the staff questions, piecing together the month she had missed, learning that Corwin had turned down every opportunity. Reginald offered him to walk away quietly with a payout, learning that he had spent his nights sitting beside her instead of exploring the luxury now available to him, learning that he still wore the same 3 shirts he had owned before the wedding because he refused to spend money that was not truly his. Slowly, the wariness in her eyes softened into something gentler, something curious, and then, on a warm afternoon in the estate's garden where she was regaining her strength, she asked him directly why he had stayed. Corwin did not have a polished answer, only the truth, spoken plainly under the shade of a flame tree in full bloom. He told her that he had married her to save his mother, but somewhere between the silence and the sunrise visits, he had started staying for her, for the person he imagined her to be before he ever heard her voice, for the strength he saw in a body that refused to give up even when the world had already begun writing her obituary in hushed tones. Vivian listened with tears sliding freely down her face, not from sorrow this time, but from the astonishing discovery that in the darkest chapter of her life, kindness had found her in the most unlikely disguise. A poor mechanic with nothing to offer but his honesty and his time. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles often arrive quietly. And don't forget to subscribe to Whispering Tales stories for more journeys like this one. In the months that followed, Reginald's schemes crumbled, one by one under the weight of a truth even he could not deny, that his sister had chosen, with clear eyes and a healed heart, to remain married to the man everyone had underestimated. Corwin's mother recovered fully from her surgery and wept the first time she was invited to sit at the Okonkwo family table, unable to believe how far her son had traveled from that mechanic's shed. Vivian eventually took her rightful place at the head of the family company, with Corwin beside her not as a hired husband but as a genuine partner, a man who had never once let go of her hand, even when the world gave him every reason to walk away. Before we close this story, if it moved you even slightly, type the word grace in the comments below, so we know this story reached exactly who it was meant to reach. And so, in a mansion that once felt like a cage of marble and suspicion, Corwin and Vivian built something the family fortune could never buy on its own. A love born not from grand gestures but from quiet mornings, patient hands, and the unshakable belief that even the poorest heart can carry the richest kind of devotion.